1 Samuel 17. We start by praying, and then we'll read 1 Samuel 17 together. Father, we need you every day. We need you today. Pray that you'd help us by your Spirit to hear your word, and that it would affect our lives, that we could glorify you in the way we think and act and speak and live. And we look to you for help. We need you. And we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Okay, 1 Samuel 17. Starting in verse 1. We're not going to get through all of 1 Samuel 17 today. We're going to split it up because there's a lot to learn here. So we're going to start there, and we'll come back to it, Lord willing, next week. But starting in verse 1, 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soka, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soka and Azekah, in Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, and he had a helmet of bronze on his head. And he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield-bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me, and if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to battle. And the names of his 3 sons who went into battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of parched grain and 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. And take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000, and see if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took the provisions and went, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion of the Philistines of Gath, Goliath by name, came out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come to defy Israel, and the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." And David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the people answered him in the same way, "So shall it be done to the man who kills him." Now Eliab, the eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, What have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And David said to Saul, You are not able to go against the Philistine and fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear, and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. And your servant struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord be with you. Then Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off, and he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. The Philistine moved forward and came near to David, with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. And David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword and a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. That's where we'll stop for today. Okay, this is a very well-known passage. Most of you, even if you're kids, have heard this several times of David and Goliath. Even in our modern culture, people still reference David and Goliath when even sports teams or other things going on, they'll reference David and Goliath. And today, we're going to focus in on this first part before David fights Goliath. There's several things that actually happen that can be overlooked in this passage. And we're going to focus in on really 3 enemies that David has to encounter. There's really more than one Goliath type figure. But before we get there, I want to remind you of last 2 weeks we've been talking about David, what we know of him before all this. And we talked about how David was serving God where he was, in the fields. And we talked about how David was with God. He was experiencing God and worshiping God in the fields before he even got to this point, before he was anointed king, and before 1 Samuel 17 when he fights Goliath. And we actually see here David, who specifically says, this is just the same way I've already been living. I've already been serving God out in the fields, and I've already been having to fight the lion and the bear. And so the way I want to start by introduction is just thinking of this, reminding you of what we already said the last couple weeks, which is that in our culture and in modern thinking, you might think of life as these big moments. And even here in this, looking back over David's life, well, this might be a big moment that people think of David's life, David fighting Goliath. And in one way, it is a big moment. But in another way, we see that David is saying, no, this is just the same way I've been living all the way up till now. I'm doing the exact same thing I did as a shepherd, except now I'm doing it on the battlefield with the Philistines. And it's the same in our lives. The vast majority of our life is decided and is shaped by our small daily actions. And it's really a fool's errand to think that we can live one way and then when a big moment comes, we're going to live a different way, right? To think, I'm going to live my daily life, half-hearted towards God, but if something really happened, then I really get committed. That's not the way we see the Bible talking about the lives of Christians, the lives of the righteous. Even you might think of Psalm chapter 1, about how the righteous are like a tree planted by streams of water, and that it's the daily bearing fruit in season, not bearing fruit one time when it's really important, but bearing fruit over your whole life. You're planted, it's rooted, your life over the long haul. We could think about this in terms of, physical things, not just spiritual things. You're not going to run a marathon in a day, prepare to run a marathon in a day. You're going to have to run week after week, mile after mile. You're not going to lose 100 pounds in a day, or even a month, or even in a year, in the same way you can't gain 100 pounds that fast. That our daily life builds over time. And you might think, well, what's one salad, today? You eat a salad today for lunch, or you eat, a big burger. You look in the mirror at night, you're not going to see any difference. But if you do that every day for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, there's going to be a big difference. The same with exercise. If you want to bench press 500 pounds like Aaron, it's not going to happen in a day. You're going to have to take steroids for years and years. That was a joke. Okay, but I think partially true. Even though I work out consistently, I'm never going to be able to bench what Aaron benches. And so, but my point is this: is that in all these things, our daily life seems at the moment like it might not matter very much. And we covered this last week. What is a big deal of how David watched the sheep? It's a big deal because God looked on. God saw. It's a big deal because when he was preparing for whatever God had for him. It's the same with learning a language. You aren't going to learn a new language in a day, but you might learn 4 or 5 words in a day, and then the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And the little progress may seem invisible to you in each moment, but over time it builds. Or there's 1,000 other examples like this in our daily life. If you want to learn to draw, sitting down, you're not going to draw a beautiful masterpiece today. It's going to take years and years of practice and practice, and you're going to get better and better over time. And that's what we see here with David. And I want to point out a few things here. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking kind of about the individual, right? About David pleasing God kind of in isolation. But there's one other thing I want to point out that we see in this section, and it is that what we do in private, it will eventually spill out into public. Makes me think of Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. The way we live our private life is going to spill out into all of our life. And the way we live all of our life is going to affect others either for the positive or for the negative. But let's look here at just what David is encountering, and we're going to circle back around to this thought at the very end. But let's look at the specifics. Let's look at what David was going up against here. The most obvious thing that David is facing is Goliath. That's what we start with in verse 10. The Philistine Goliath said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And when Saul and all Israel heard these words, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. But we talked about courage, what courage is. God strengthening your hand. God strengthening your hand to do what he wants you to do. And of course, this example, we're going to talk more about courage next week, but is an example of courage. Everyone else was scared. They had weak hands or falling hands or weak knees. They were scared of Goliath. And that's the most obvious thing in this chapter. But that's not the only thing that David had to face in this chapter. I want you to look now in verse 28. Eliab. Eliab is David's elder brother. And he heard David talking about what's going on with Goliath. And this is what he said. Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." So here, not only is David facing this difficult situation with Goliath that we know he steps into, we see David's older brother. And David's older brother is saying, "You're unimportant. You're unimportant." This is the same thing we covered several weeks ago. There's no person or activity that's really unimportant, because all of our activities, every one of us lives before God. But this is what he says. Notice how he phrases it. He says, "With whom have you left those few sheep?" So he points out, you're a shepherd, which is unimportant, but you're a shepherd of a few sheep. You're an unimportant shepherd. You're unimportant of the unimportant. So he's pointing that out to him. And it says, his anger was kindled. And he says, "I know your presumption." So David, in this moment, is going against, later on we know he goes against Goliath, but he's going against people's opinion of him, right? He's going against his brother's opinion. He's going against this belief that's being pushed upon him that he's not important. Not only that, his brother questions his motives. He says, "I know the presumption and the evil of your heart." He's saying, you are here and you're doing something evil. I know what you really want. You have this evil desire in your heart. And of course, it goes from Eliab back to David, and David says, "What have I done now? Was it not but a word?" And he turned away from him toward another and spoke the same way. And the people answered as before. I want you to notice something about David here. David is going, and he's asking, he's concerned. We actually know from later in the chapter what he's concerned about. He's concerned about God's honor and how everyone's afraid and that God's being dishonored here. Well, his brother comes and says, "You're unimportant. Who did you leave those few sheep with? I'm angry at you. You're presumptuous. Not only are you unimportant, you're a presumptuous, unimportant person. And not only that, you're evil. You have an evil heart. I know you can't be doing this out of the goodness of your heart." Now think about this. Here's this man, old enough to be the oldest brother, fighting against the Philistines, and he levels some pretty harsh criticism towards David. And look at David's response. "What have I done now? Was it but a word?" And he turned away and spoke the same way. He kept on. Think about that. He turned away from his older brother, deeply criticizing and cutting him, but he kept on going. He was convinced, it doesn't matter what my job is. It doesn't matter what people think of me. It doesn't matter even if they think what they think of me outwardly, my job, my importance. It doesn't matter their emotions towards me. It doesn't matter their opinion of my heart, whether it's good or bad. And he kept going. Now, let me ask you this. Is this connected to the whole thing with Goliath? How many people, how many of us push through if somebody is criticizing us? If somebody is putting you down, or if somebody is even questioning your motives? If you feel that you know what you're doing is right, do you keep going? Are you able to stand up to someone else and know, God, I'm living before you. I'm not living for other people. What matters most is not how important or unimportant people think. It's what God thinks. It's not what people think how good or bad I am. It's what God thinks. It's not what other people say my motives are. It's what God knows my motives are. That's pretty bold, isn't it? There's quite a boldness here before we ever get to Goliath. Well, it doesn't stop there. Then we move on, not just from his older brother, but to the king of Israel. Verse 32. David says, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and will fight with this Philistine." Well, we see another glimpse into David's motives here. He's concerned about the people of Israel and their belief and their faith in God. And one of the reasons he's wanting to go is for God's glory. We see that later on, in the name of the Lord, but also for the good of his people. He doesn't want the people cowering before Goliath. He wants the people trusting the Lord. But look what Saul says. "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." So now it's not just his brother saying he's not unimportant. It's the king of Israel. The king of Israel is saying, "You can't do this. You don't have the ability to do this." We could put a little word in Saul's mouth, but this is a foolish thought that you, a youth, could fight this man of war. But look at David's boldness in this way. Just to answer the king, and this is what he says. "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear, I took a lamb from the flock. I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and I struck him and I killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine." So David is not only facing Goliath, which is fearful, then his brother, who tells him he's unimportant and evil and mad at him. In Hebrew, the word for getting angry, the phrase is, "your nose gets hot." His nose was hot. His nose was hot at David. It kind of gives you a picture in your mind, doesn't it? Somebody kind of getting in your face, red-faced. And then here comes Saul. They take him to Saul when they hear what he's saying. And David says, "Don't let any man's heart fail. I'm going to go." And when Saul says, "You're not able," he says, "I'm just going to keep doing what I've always been doing, which is trusting the Lord, even in dangerous situations. I'm just going to keep trusting the Lord. And when I was in the field and I trusted the Lord, he helped me. When I'm in this situation and I trust the Lord, he's going to help me." And then Saul says, "Go, and the Lord be with you." But it doesn't stop there, right? Then he faces Goliath. Now the reality is coming upon him. He's out in the field in front of all of Israel, and there's Goliath. And what does he say? "When the Philistine looked," this is verse 42, "and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, 'Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?' And the Philistine cursed David by his gods." So over and over, even before David got to Goliath, there was this, we could say, psychological or social pressure to quit, right? From his brother, from the king, and then from Goliath, who's disdaining him, who's defying him, who's making fun of him. And what does David do? He keeps on. He stays out. Not only does he stay out and fight Goliath, there to fight Goliath, we see his motive, which we've already covered, but let's cover it again. David's answer to Goliath in verse 46, 45 and 46. "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you. The Lord will deliver you. Not I will defeat you, but the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the hosts of the Philistines to this day to the birds of the air. Let all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's. He will give you into our hand. He will give you into our hand. Okay, well, Dale Ralph Davis says David doesn't face just one Goliath, he faces 3 Goliaths, is the way Dale Ralph Davis talks about this. But you see that there's a lot of courage even before he gets out to Goliath. There's a lot of that I want to talk about next week, too, about courage in general. But this week I want to point out some things. Okay, I'm going to split this kind of into 2. But of what all that we've seen here, let's see what we can learn from this. First thing, our good works don't save us, but God has good work for us to do. Our good works don't save us, but God has good work for us to do. Of course, the most famous verse about good works not saving us comes into my mind is from Ephesians 2. For by grace you've been saved through faith, not of your own doing. It is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. But then the next verse, verse 10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God has prepared before him that we should walk in them. God has given us good work to do. That work doesn't save us, but he's still prepared a good work for us to do. Acts 13, the summary of David's life, we've covered this before. It says, for David, after he served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep and was laid with his fathers. That's a summary of David's life. After he served his purpose, God's purpose for him in his own generation. God had a purpose for David. David did what God wanted him to do. That started in the fields, keeping the sheep, worshiping God, serving God where he is. But it continued on through here, 1 Samuel 17, and all the way into his kingship. God has given us good work to do. They don't save us. Our good works don't save us. This doesn't save David. David didn't work his own salvation out. But that doesn't mean God didn't prepare works for him to do, good works. And we see David walking in that. The second thing I want to point out is that we need to be absolutely clear on what is right and what is most important. Absolutely clear on what is right and what is most important. There's a short psalm here I want you to turn to. It's a Psalm of David. This is written later in his life, but I feel like it summarizes this situation. If you'll turn to Psalm 15. I've been thinking about going through these Psalms and thinking, okay, when was this possibly written in David's life? You know, some of the Psalms tell us specifically this is when it was written, some don't. And there's another clue that I feel like really hit me this week as I was reading this Psalm and wondering, well, this Psalm says just a Psalm of David. It doesn't say to the choir master, so could this possibly be a Psalm in the early life of David? Well, verse 1, I think, helps us to see that this is actually written later in his life. Let's read it. Psalm 15, verse 1, a Psalm of David. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell in your holy hill? Well, this is a reference to Jerusalem, right? That the tabernacle was in Jerusalem, and the holy hill is the hill of Zion, where Jerusalem is. But Jerusalem hasn't been conquered from the Jebusites until 2 Samuel 5. And so this is obviously written later in his life. But I think it gets across his heart towards God here. He's asking, what is a righteous life? Who can be with God? Verse 2, he who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change. He does not put out his money at interest and does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. Let's stop right there and let's think about this. Think about this psalm what it could have said. What if David had written, "Who can sojourn in God's holy tent? Who can dwell on his holy hill? The one who does really brave and mighty things and kills giants for God." Right? It doesn't say that. The whole thing is talking about his daily life and walk before God. The one who, verse 2, walks. Of course, we hear about the way we walk in the Bible, but we're saying our daily life. The way we walk is what we already started the sermon on. What is your day-to-day life with God? What is your day-to-day life? That's your walk. It's step after step after step, day after day after day, your year after year, and that builds up a life. It's not big events, although it is, little events do become big events. But it's your daily walk. And it says we should walk blamelessly, do what is right, and speak truth in his heart. Well, we see that here in 1 Samuel 17. David is convinced that he should do what is right. Right? What's right here? To honor God, that God would be honored. Speaks truth in his heart. When his brother tells him, "You're unimportant, you have these evil motives," or when the Philistine says, "There's no way you could defeat me," or "Your God is basically nothing." He's not only insulting David, he insults God. What does David do? He speaks truth in his heart. He says, "No, God is the God. The battle belongs to the Lord. God can deliver not with swords or spears, but he can use even a little shepherd boy to deliver it, because God is in control. The battle belongs to the Lord. God is the one who will give the Philistine into his hand." Verse 4, "In whose eyes a vile person is despised, but honors those who fear the Lord." David is upset by sin. David hates that Goliath is cursing God, is despising God, is putting down God. Look at the last verse there too. "And does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things will never be moved." What is that? Why is not taking a bribe against the innocent there at the end? Well, back to the point that I'm bringing out here. Be absolutely clear on what is right and what is most important. All these things are putting God in perspective, putting our life in perspective. What's most important? What God thinks, not what your older brother thinks. What God thinks, not what even the king of Israel thinks. What God thinks, not what your worst enemy thinks. What matters is not how the world sees you, but how God sees you. What matters most is not what other people think of your motives, but what God thinks. And the person who decides, "I'm going to do what's right," period. When I'm in the field with the sheep, when I talk to my older brother, when I talk to the king of Israel, when I talk to a giant. It says, "He who does these things shall never be moved." He just decided, I want to do what's right. I want to walk in a blameless way and speak truth in my heart wherever I am. Hate sin and do good. Basically, we could summarize all this. That leads to kind of restatement of the same point, which is this: live your daily life in the small things to be ready for anything. Live your daily life in the small things, quote unquote, right? We already talked about there's no small things, really. Where everything we are doing is for God's glory or it's not. And that's how we're ready for anything. We're not waiting for a big opportunity. The person who doesn't take a bribe against the innocent, what if that's a little bribe? No, we live our daily life in the small things to be ready for anything. And that we see that here with David. We see this is literally what David is saying. David is giving us a sermon. We see David fighting Goliath. And what does he tell us? He says, one, it's not me, it's God, right? I'm trusting the Lord. It's the Lord that does this. It's the Lord that delivers. It's the Lord that the battle belongs to. It's the Lord who's going to deliver Israel. It's the Lord's honor that we're doing it for. And he also says, I'm doing the exact same thing I've always been doing as a shepherd. This is the exact same thing as when I trusted God with the lion and with the bear and with the sheep and when no one was looking, when no one was around. And when he could have just let the sheep go. When a lion or a bear came, he could just say, yeah, a little bit too much for me. I'm not going to, we can deal with one less sheep. I'll let it go. No, he didn't do that. He was trying to honor the Lord, to trust the Lord, and to be diligent where he was. And then when he faces Goliath, he's using the exact same thinking. God, I'm trusting God. God's the one that's going to deliver me. The same God that delivered me there, he's going to deliver me here. So we live our daily life in the small things to be ready for anything. You and I have a purpose in our generation, just like we talked about. God put us here for a reason. And I want to point out one thing. Think about what this is communicating to Israel, to the people around David. Think about how this affected Israel and their confidence in God. Well, it definitely affected them then, right? They saw God actually is in control. God actually is more powerful than the Philistines. They went from being scared eventually to chasing the Philistines and celebrating God's victory. We know that. But not only that, it affected Israel for years, to the point where we're still reading this. David was faithful in the little things with the lion and the bear, and that prepared him for this, and that affected the people around him positively. They learned something about God. They were challenged in their wrong thinking about God. They were helped to move forward. And what about us? Proverbs 11 talks about this same idea. It says, whoever troubles his own household will inherit the wind. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. Well, to summarize, kind of paraphrase that proverb is, you're going to either have a bad effect on the people around you, you're going to have a good effect on the people around you. Are you a tree of life to the people around you? Or are you troubling the people around you or bringing them down? David had a huge effect. This little nobody proved what his brother was saying was wrong, right? He actually was, quote unquote, important. God did have a plan for David that was to help other people around him. Saul was wrong. With God's help, David is able. And again, he pointed back to God, to God's glory. It wasn't to show how great he was, it was to show how great God is. Last thing I want to point out here. I was preparing and I was thinking about these things. You know when you read a verse and it's like, wow, I'm going to remember this verse. This is a really amazing verse. You know how some verses get famous, like Isaiah 53 or Psalm 23. They're like, wow, these are really good verses. I read a verse in Proverbs and I thought, have I ever read this verse? This is an awesome verse. Like, this is we call it a coffee cup verse. Like, why isn't this verse on coffee cups? Maybe it is. I'm going to read this verse and I wonder, I'm just going to ask this question. If you recognize this verse, I want you to raise your hand because I'm just curious. Because when I read it, I was like, I know I've read through Proverbs many times, but I do not remember ever reading this verse. And it's a really amazing verse. Proverbs 28:1. The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion. Okay. All right. Half the people. Okay. Maybe you've all got coffee cups. I really like this verse. I don't ever remember this verse. I never memorized this verse. I don't ever remember reading this verse. I really like this verse. This is an amazing verse. And this really summarizes David here. The righteous are bold as a lion. That really summarizes this whole thing. David was bold. He was convinced. this is the right thing. And if my older brother says, you're evil, I'm mad at you, you're unimportant, and he makes fun of you, he says he turned around and he said the exact same thing again, which is kind of amazing. And when they took him to the king of Israel, they're like, oh, look, this guy's saying maybe somebody should go up there. Let's take him to the king of Israel. He went to the king of Israel and he told him the exact same thing. Yeah, I think somebody should go out there and defeat Goliath, because he's defying the armies of Israel, and other people's hearts are troubled. And when Saul says, I don't think you're able to do it, he says, I'll do it. I don't want anyone's heart to be troubled. God, the same way he delivered me from the lion and the bear, he's going to deliver me from the Philistine. And when he goes out to the Philistine, and when the Philistine makes fun of him, he says the exact same thing he's been saying. He's actually even more bold. And he says, God will deliver you. I want to point out one thing as well. David says he's going to cut off Goliath's head. Have you ever noticed this? David said, I'm going to cut off your head. And he had no sword in his hand. He had no sword. That is extremely bold. He had no sword. He's saying, I'm going to take your sword from your hand. I'm going to cut off your head. That's wild. That is like the Holy Spirit must have inspired him, because it's unbelievable for a little shepherd boy to say that. And actually, it's actually even more amazing, because they talk about later on David getting the sword, and it's, in the temple, and they say there's no sword like that. It's huge. It's like, some of you kids probably have seen like anime cartoons, or like, the Scottish longswords that are like so big you can't hardly pick it up. Like, that's the kind of sword he's talking about. He's like, it's impressive that he could even pick up the sword. It's huge. It's like longer than him and heavy. He's bold as a lion. We don't want to be bold just to be bold. It says the righteous are bold as a lion. We've got to be convinced God is with us. We've got to be convinced this is righteous and right. And we have to practice in our daily life. We have got to practice in our daily life. We're not going to be able to stand up to the older brother. If we can't stand up to the older brother, we're not going to be able to stand up to Goliath. If you can't stand up to the older brother, and say what's right, you're not going to be able to say it right to the king. And if you're not able to say it right, say it to the king, you're not going to be able to say it to Goliath. He had a lot of opportunities to be a coward, to not do the right thing, to back down, to distrust God, to get afraid. But he had been practicing in his daily life. And so that's my call to us. God has a purpose for your life. God has a purpose. You can be like David and positively affect the people around you. You can encourage people to trust God. You can encourage people to be better fathers and mothers and parents and friends and church members and workers. You can encourage people. But you need to be convinced, absolutely clear on what is right and what is important, and then pursue it all the time, in the little things and in the big things. And those are all practicing for whatever God has you to do. We have no idea what God is going to use in our life to help people or to hurt people. We have a really great opportunity the opportunity to honor God whatever we do. It can't be understated. You ever have that feeling with your kids where it's like, sometimes I say this, if I could shake this into you, I would, but I can't. You have to listen, Let's apply it, broadly, and then let's apply it specifically. Is there anything in your daily life that you know this is not good long term? My daily life is a life of, it could be thousands of things. It could be, is a life of, it's an unhealthy life. I'm not exercising. I'm overeating. I'm lazy. I'm late. I'm inconsistent. I don't follow through on my commitments. There's 1,000 possible things. Is this a pattern? And instead of just excusing it, realize I'm building up a life here. This is the pattern of my life. It could be Bible reading. Are we building up a pattern of shallow engagement with God? Is that the way you want to live your life? It could be parenting. I'm building up a pattern of yelling at my kids every day, or not noticing my kids or taking any interest in my kids every day. Is there a pattern with our marriages? Are you pouring into your spouse? Are you kind, considerate, loving? Or are you distant, dismissive, inconsiderate? Are you cowardly in your interactions with people? Are there things that you know you should say and you won't because you know their nose might get hot, right? They might get upset at you. Their feelings might get hurt. They might think something bad of you. They might even question your motives. Let's love people enough, and let's love God's glory enough just to say what we know we need to say. Think about what Jesus said about Christians being the salt of the earth. How many things in our culture would really be different if we just said no? If we spoke up, if we said, hey, you know what, that's wrong. I just know for me, like thinking back my time as a teacher, there was definitely times like that. I think I've shared this before where, they said, oh, we don't have enough books, let's just photocopy this book. And I said, no, that's stealing. You need to buy the book or give us different curriculum. Like, we're not going to steal curriculum, And they said, oh, okay, we won't. It just took one person saying, you can't steal curriculum, you need to actually purchase it. How many little things are there like that? In our culture, we were just having a conversation with parenting. Maybe it's as simple as you see someone screaming at their kid in public, and it's bad, and you need to just go over and say, hey, are you okay? This isn't how you treat a 1-year-old. You're scaring me the way you're treating your child, especially if this is how you do it in public. What about at home? Is that uncomfortable? Absolutely. But we have to love God, love the kid, more than we love people's opinions. I think part of the urgency of my heart comes from recent cultural events, right? There's a lady on the train who died, just last week, and nobody stepped in. Nobody did anything. In fact, most people left. I think they said that everyone on that particular train car left and did nothing. And somebody else from a different train car is the one that stepped in. Too late at that point. We don't want to be like that in anything. But we are building up a pattern of our life. And we're not going to step in on the train car, or we're not going to step in on these other things if we can't say, even little things. If we compromise on all the little things, when the big thing comes along, we're not gonna step in. So we want to be convinced what is right, living for God's glory in all things in our daily life. We want to hate evil, right? Part of this is David hates the evil that's going on. He loves God's glory and he hates what's evil. And he had an opportunity to fill the purpose for which he had in his generation. So we want to move forward with confidence.